All right, everybody, I think we'll go ahead and get started. And good evening to everyone, and welcome to tonight's conservation conversation, The Lives and Times of Midwest Amphibians with Dr. Spencer Cortwright. My name is Sage Santel, and I'm the Education Director here at Sycamore Land Trust. And tonight we have folks joining from every corner of the state, from Fort Wayne to Gary, down in Madison, Indiana, my hometown, to Evansville. And we even have a couple people joining from New York. So thank you for everyone for being here tonight, and thank you for supporting our mission. With your generosity and your engagement and opportunities like this, you make our conservation, restoration, and environmental education work possible across Southern Indiana. For a little bit of housekeeping before we get started, this presentation will be recorded this evening. I'm going to share a little information on Sycamore. Dr. Cortwright will present, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. Please hold your questions, comments, or experiences until the end. Once the presentation has concluded, you'll be able to enter your questions or comments in the chat or ask the expert yourself. Dr. Cortwright will answer as time allows. All right, let's get started. Sycamore Land Trust mission is to preserve the beauty, health, and diversity of Southern Indiana's natural landscape through strategic land conservation and environmental education. Across our 26 county and 12,000 plus acres, we work to conserve the incredible diversity of habitats that make this region unique, like seasonal wetlands, old growth forests, restored meadows, meandering streams, and more. These varied landscapes support an amazing array of amphibians. If you visited Bean Blossom Bottoms Nature Preserve in the spring or early summer, I'm sure you've heard the sounds of chorus frogs, spring peepers, and calling toads. Tonight's speaker is someone who's dedicated his career to studying exactly these kinds of species, ecosystems, and relationships. Dr. Spencer Cortwright is a biologist, researcher, and educator at Indiana University Northwest, whose work focuses on Midwest amphibians and reptiles, wetland ecology, and conservation. His background includes extensive field research, conservation work, and public education centered around amphibian behavior, habitat use, breeding ecology, and the challenges these species face in a changing world. What makes Dr. Cortwright truly engaging is his ability to combine deep scientific knowledge, a little humor, and a genuine passion for sharing these animals with others. Whether he's talking about salamander migrations on a rainy spring night or the hidden lives of amphibians, he brings both expertise and enthusiasm to the conversation. We're fortunate to have him here tonight with us, and I know you'll leave with a deeper appreciation for the amphibians that call the Midwest home. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Spencer Cortwright.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Sage and Kate, for your help in getting this presentation together and promoted and getting everyone in here. So I hope I have my slideshow up now. And I'd like to mention not only thanks to Sage and Kate for all their work in community outreach and education, but all the folks at Sycamore Land Trust and what you do to help with conservation. This year is the 250th anniversary of our country, which I guess is the semi-quincentennial, and it has other names too, like the quarter millennium, but semi-quincentennial is one name. Many of us on this call were alive for the bicentennial 50 years ago. And in my opinion, between the bicentennial and the semi-quincentennial, the greatest thing to happen in this country is the expansion and explosion of land trusts for the communities across the country. It's the greatest single thing I believe that's happened in that 50-year time span. And so I hope when we go toward the tricentennial, which I won't be around for, that expansion continues even more. I thank everyone out there who came in on the call today for all you do for conservation. Perhaps the most important thing that you do is go out and visit nature preserves. If we don't have people going out into nature, we will have little impetus to save nature. So thanks to all of you for going out and into nature and attending this presentation tonight. I'd like to take a couple more minutes just kind of mentioning how this presentation came to be. I kind of come out of the woodwork for the folks at Sycamore Land Trust, so I'd like to mention how it is that someone can be can study amphibians for many decades and give these kind of presentations. And it all started in the fall of 1981 when I started graduate school at IU Bloomington. My advisor, Dr. Craig Nelson, who sadly passed away a couple of months ago, called me in for a meeting and asked me, what would you like to study for your dissertation? And I had this proud idea that I wanted to study animal communities that where the animals use two different habitats, like a sand dune next to an oak woodland. And I thought this was a great idea. It was met with about 8 seconds of silence from Craig, which felt like 8 minutes. But he said, well, in the woods around here, we have ponds where the amphibians go in to breed and then they metamorphose from it and go into the land. Is that what you're talking about? So I lied and said, yes, that's what I'm talking about. And that's how I got started on studying amphibians in the early 1980s. And I studied those populations in Brown County for over a quarter of a century. As I moved around to different places, I kept a lot of those studies going. After I finished my degree in Bloomington, I went up to do a postdoc at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So I started studying amphibians in Southwest Michigan. And then I took my position at IU Northwest. So I studied amphibians in Northwest Indiana, Northeast Indiana, and lots of other places around the Midwest. So that's how I came to learn all this stuff. But how did I come to give public presentations? Around 1995, Anna Grabowski of Lake County Parks up here in Northwest Indiana asked if I could give a public presentation at Gibson Woods Nature Preserve, a state dedicated nature preserve. And I did. I threw together a few slides, the old-fashioned slides with carousels, and everybody liked the presentation, and she said, you should call it The Lives and Times of Amphibians. So I stole that from her, adding just the word Midwestern, and I've been using that now for 30 years. And of course, I've added many, many more slides to the presentation over time as I gave it to a whole bunch of other entities, Indiana Master Naturalist, once that came in, and classes and so on. And around the time COVID came in, I was still using those old-fashioned slides and lugging the slide projector around. And it started to break down on me, that whole system. So I had the slides digitized, and that allowed me to add lots of videos and other exciting things that you'll see tonight. So that produces the presentation for tonight, and I'm super excited about tonight because the main slides that started this slideshow all come from Brown County. And when I present up here, most people care about the dunes and they don't care about Brown County. But now I'm conversing with an audience who's in the Brown County is their home. So I feel especially glad to be able to present it to you folks. But here's our agenda for tonight. We're going to first consider the optimal aquatic and terrestrial habitats for amphibians. Most amphibians breed in water and metamorphose onto land. So we're going to look at optimal features of those habitats. And then we'll start ramping things up by looking at the animals themselves, the species diversity, the main species that you'll see in Indiana. We'll learn about how they mate, how they choose mates, how they lay their eggs. And once the eggs hatch, we'll learn about risks during the larval stage of their life cycle. And then once metamorphosis comes, are there still risks? We'll find out there are, and it doesn't get any easier when they go on to land during the juvenile period. And we'll end with a few slides on some of my field methods for how I learned all this, aside from the material I got from publications, other people's publications. Let's start with the aquatic habitat known as a marsh. A marsh is any wetland dominated by herbaceous vegetation. And we can see in this relatively small marsh various kinds of herbaceous, non-woody vegetation. There is a woody willow shrub in there, but most of it is marsh vegetation. Now, why is this optimal habitat for amphibians? First of all, it's sunny. So that means there's a lot of photosynthesis of algae, and also, since it's warm, a lot of production of bacteria, and this forms the base of the food web for tadpoles and then later on for salamander larvae. So sunny means a great foundation to the food web. It's warm so that the larvae will develop faster. if you're pregnant in the winter or in the summer, it really doesn't matter. The gestation's about 9 months, but a warmer wetland, you're going to develop faster to metamorphosis. And this marsh is not very deep, so about every other year it dries up. So that means there's no fish in it, which is a bad four-letter word for amphibians. Most amphibians. Fish have well-developed fins supported by spines. They have a protrusable mouth so they can reach out to their prey. They can suck them in. They can do a real number on killing amphibian larvae. But since this dries up periodically, there will be no fish. How about this big marsh up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan? Should be good for all the reasons we just gave, but it's so large that the aggregations of amphibians are likely to be in pockets around it and not everywhere within the wetland. Or at Bean Blossom Bottoms, you have a big marshy area here as you look west on the preserve, kind of have almost an oxbow looking slough here, the swampy areas in here and Bean Blossom Creek. So this gets to be such a large wetland complex almost that you'll find the amphibians in various pockets. Plus you throw in that bad four-letter word, because if fish wash out of the creek into the wetlands, then it could be a bad year for certain amphibians if the fish are present. But if the fish didn't get washed out of the creek, then it's a great year. It's like going to the casino for these amphibians many times. We'll look at that a little more closely in a bit. Now here's a shallow lake in the Upper Peninsula that almost dries up in some years, but never actually dries up. So it does have some fish, but they tend to be small, like this mud minnow. So if you look at the width of its jaws, it can't eat a tadpole bigger than that. So if you can grow fast enough, you can outgrow your predators. But until then, the fish are going to do a number on the amphibians. So here's a little woodland pond in the Indiana dunes. It's taken around the 4th of July, and you can see the leaf litter is already starting to poke up through it. It has a sunny area and a cooler, shady area. It looks like it'll dry up in this year, so no fish. We have some sun and some cool, but it can dry up kind of early. So it will probably have somewhat faster developing amphibian species like the wood frog and the blue-spotted salamander. The same day, here's a buttonbush swamp. So a swamp is any kind of wetland that has dominated by woody vegetation. There's a little bit of a grassy area here, but a lot of woody buttonbush. And that's going to tend to cool off the wetland, but also it will take the water out of the pond and transpire it through the stomata in the leaves. So it can dry up very fast, so there's going to be no fish. This should be a pretty good habitat for amphibians, just a little cooler. Now, how about this very temporary, what we call a vernal pond, taken the same day up at the Indiana dunes? The only water is like a dishpan of water right here in the middle. It's already dry. So this one is going to have only the fastest developing amphibian species in it, because it dries early in most year. Here's a buttonbush swamp the same day that was already dried. So again, only going to be the fastest developing amphibians. Up in Michigan near the Traverse City area, we have a river going between some of the lakes. So we know there's going to be marauding fish going up and down that. But how about the marshes to the side of it? And right here, we don't see much water, but if we take the boardwalk to the end and crane our neck a little bit, we can hear gray tree frogs calling from this little bay here. So it looks like the vegetation thins out enough to have water for tadpoles, but there's enough protection, in this case from cattails, to keep the fish who are marauding up and down the stream from getting at the tadpoles. So we had at least some amphibians there. How about a bog? The frog in the bog idea is always a flows off the tongue, but as we know, most bogs are rather acidic. And so here it's filled in with land because the soil and plants because of the decomposition. Now this water here is maybe a little less acidic, so that it could be okay for amphibians, but in most cases a bog is not great habitat for amphibians. Now how about this one where there's a bog on one side of the basin and a lake on the other side? Well, we know it's acidic to the left, too much acid, that's a four-letter word. And then there's fish in the other side where it's less acidic, so probably not great amphibian habitat. Now here's a forested swamp with a buttonbush swamp zone in it that's a bit more sunny. And when I sampled through this, I got scattered blue spotted salamander larvae in the cool area, but the real mother load of tadpoles and salamanders was out in the sun. So the sunnier areas are going to attract the amphibians at a higher rate, the cooler areas a little bit less so. Now here's a floodplain swamp, and I forget where in Brown County this is, so I could never find it again, but we can see that the leaf litter is pretty easily visible. It's not very deep, so you'd probably think, yeah, this is going to dry up occasionally, so it can't have fish. But as I walked through it, I found no amphibian eggs, and I could see some fish. It turns out there's a stream going back here, so apparently it flooded sometime during the winter and brought fish in. And the amphibians, many amphibians can smell fish, and they'll avoid breeding there. But a couple 100 yards down was a buttonbush swamp, had all kinds of amphibian eggs in it, and I didn't see any fish swimming around. So it's kind of like, again, going to the casino as far as where they're going to find their best places for breeding. When I started up here in Northwest Indiana, I went down to LaSalle Fish and Wildlife area and found this swamp, and it looked like it was drying up pretty good. And as I sampled around, I couldn't get any amphibians, so I figured it must be connected to the Kankakee River. And so a lot of those swampy regions have some connection to the Kankakee River, so the fish can get in there. Then I was driving. This is a little bit of a fuzzy picture. Again, it's digitized from the original slide, so it loses some quality there too. And I was on, I think this is Highway 46 over getting toward Terre Haute. And so I pulled the car off the road and said, I got to find if there's some amphibians here. And I sampled around, couldn't get any, but I started getting back there. I think it's connected to the White River. Now, the pin oak swamp is a different kind of habitat for what you might know in southern Indiana. It grows usually on sandy soils. These pin oaks hold their branches real low. And then also black gum grows in there as well. And we can see there's a fair amount of light in there, so the amphibians are going to be attracted to the warm, productive areas. But if it doesn't rain much, these are on sandy soil, so the water can be taken up through the roots really rapidly and transpired. I've seen some of these pinhook swamps dry really quick, but if you get good rain, they're great amphibian habitat. In northern Indiana and Michigan and Wisconsin and northern Illinois, lots of glacially deposited morainal woodland ponds. This one up in, might be in Douglas Woods, is a backward shaped C. The letter C faces to the left here with a peninsula in it. It's mostly cool, so maybe not the warmest pond for amphibians, but it does dry up occasionally, so no fish. So these are great amphibian ponds. And then sometimes animals make ponds for amphibians. So in this case, beaver in Yellowwood State Forest, they just made the dam back here, cut down the trees. So this pond was formed, and all of a sudden, a great biblical multitude of amphibians started using it and reproducing from it. It did not capture any fish from the small stream that went through. But the beaver family 10 years later was trapped or died or moved out, something like that. They stopped taking care of the dam. The pool got really small. The stream re-emerged. A great amphibian habitat here like a great woodland pond was practically gone. So those beaver ponds come and go. How about out on islands in the Great Lakes? Can you have amphibians out there? And you can. There'll be rocky pools along the shoreline. And we remember that about 4,000 to 8,000 years ago, the Great Lakes were down 100 feet or something like that. So that's probably when amphibians got out to the island, although they could raft on vegetation and get out there, but they've probably been living on this island for thousands of years. So that island has rock pools like this, so we can see the high water mark to it going down somewhat here, some wetland vegetation. These are great for amphibians. These tadpoles are all just gorging on the algae and bacteria growing on the rock there. Here's one that metamorphosed from one of the rock pools. Now, how about the Great Lakes themselves? Can you have amphibians in the Great Lakes? There have been some reports of newts and mud puppies from the Great Lakes, but I don't know how abundant they are. But one day when we were up at Good Harbor Bay in Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, uh, we saw a whole bunch of green frogs in the lake. And this was when we first started going there, nobody went there. We could be alone, but this was more recently, and there's a lot of more people there. And so Good Harbor Bay is northwest of Traverse City. There's the road that you go on, and there's the beach that sometimes you can have that much beach to yourself there. But we saw a whole bunch of green frogs here, and I wondered what that was all about. So I recalled that it had rained a whole bunch the 2 days before that. So I think this stream here flooded and took some green frogs from the marshy areas here out into the lake and pushed them to the southeast. And then we saw them down here on the beach. The kids were playing with them, kind of causing big problems because you can imagine sand on frog skin is not a good combination. They need a nice mucousy skin, and I was kind of retching there watching the kids with sandy hands handle them, and I finally went up to the dad and asked him if he could have them not play with the frogs anymore, and he understood, and they didn't anymore. In the same area, you have these marl lakes. And when I look at these marl lakes, I don't see a lot of fish in them. I do think they have fish, but I don't see amphibians either. These are the opposite of acidic. They're very basic in their pH. They have a lot of calcium coming into the lake, and it forms this calcium carbonate, a white soil, basically, like wet chalk dust. And I don't see amphibians in there, although I suppose they could be in there. But in this survey of wetlands, we do have to acknowledge that in the state of Indiana, at one point, we'd lost 87% of our wetlands. This was, I believe, estimated by DNR biologists in the 1950s. And you can see we're on par with other states in our neighborhood at the same latitude for wetland loss. And in general, the highest wetland loss is in the orange and red here, wherever there's a lot of people. Europe, the United States, Central America, India, Southeast Asia, parts of Australia, parts of Africa, we have large losses. But some of us might remember that in the 1980s, especially the 1988 presidential election, both candidates debated no net loss of wetlands. And they agreed. It was hard to believe they even talked about wetlands in a debate, and that they agreed was even harder to believe, but that's how it used to be. And so when Bush won the election, sure enough, there was laws to protect wetlands. And for 20 plus years, almost 30 years, wetlands were well protected in Indiana. But many of you may know a few years ago, the state of Indiana went back on that and became, I believe, the first state in the nation to go back to allowing people to destroy wetlands if it's on their property. Hopefully, many people care about their wetlands and won't do it, but we became the leader to do that. I think some other states have joined us on that. But here's a wetland restored not far from our campus, and I hadn't noticed leopard frogs there, but all of a sudden there was a great multitude of leopard frogs. So if you restore wetlands, you can, if the amphibians are around and don't have to cross interstates or something like that, they can take advantage of them. In Brown County and other neighboring counties, many of the wetlands were in the wider floodplains. But as you drive from Bloomington to Nashville, you know that a lot of those were converted to farmland. Some have been reforested, but a lot of the wetlands were drained. But in the 1960s, DNR, I think they worked for the DNR, would take bulldozers and maybe a 12-pack of Budweiser and drive through the woods and just make these random ponds. You can see with the backpack, the ponds are not that big. Now, they don't usually dry up, but they're so small they don't have good fish in them. But the amphibians have almost increased in abundance in Brown County because of these hundreds and hundreds of ponds. And then there's homestead ponds. So after the Civil War, the Homestead Act, and I don't know the details of it, but you could get land really cheaply, and as long as you improved it by making a farm on it. So a lot of the hills of Brown County had farms on them from the Homestead Act, and you had to build a homestead pond. So the horses would drag a big scoop and dig out a little pond, and the animals drank out of that. But of course, the Great Depression came, and that took the livelihood away, so it became state forest or national forest. And then the ponds are great havens for amphibians. Here's a bulldoze pond that kind of looks like a woodland, the backward sea pond. This is after 30 or 40 years. Here's a small bulldoze pond in Hoosier National Forest, just south of Yellowwood State Forest, and has natural duckweed, sunny patches, shady patches. There are just hundreds of these ponds. Now, the people didn't drink out of those homestead ponds, but they drank out of a cistern. So water would be channelized from the roof into a cistern, a big hole in the ground that had an opening about the size of a manhole cover. And when the land became state or national forest, these were dangerous. If you fell in them, even before phones or even with phones, you're not going to get a signal in there. So they blew them up and made these dynamited cisterns, and you can imagine the amphibians just loved them. If they stop logging in an area for a while, they've usually compressed the soil in the road so it holds water for several years after that, and that's great amphibian habitat, not by great numbers, but pretty good. There are a few natural depressions up in the hills of Brown County. This one in Yellowwood State Forest I studied for 17 years. Here we have about 20 wood frog egg masses right in the middle, and every year for about 17 years, all the tadpoles died because the pond dried up. But in that 18th year, it rained almost every day in May. You know, that sometimes happens. And they brought forth a great multitude. So it's kind of like us buying the Powerball ticket. We never win. We're probably never going to win. But once in a while, if you do win, it's a huge prize. And that genetic urge to occasionally breed in risky habitats can pay back great at times. Now, the wood frog female only lives at most 5 years, so many of them are never going to get the payback, but some will, and that keeps the genetic wanderlust in their blood. How about streams, these intermittent streams where there's pools and riffles? A few amphibians will breed in them. Some salamanders naturally breed in these streams, as we'll see, but sometimes tree frogs breed in there. Sometimes toads do. During drier periods, they become isolated pools, but that's still great. They can metamorphose from that. Well, let's switch to the terrestrial habitats. And let's look at this spot taken in May in Yellowwood State Forest, and start at the bottom. The leaf litter at the bottom can help keep the soil moist if it's raining periodically. Amphibians, as you know, need moist skin primarily because they either entirely or largely breathe through their skin. And they need to get that oxygen to dissolve in the moisture in the skin, and then it'll diffuse into the capillary beds, and that can be either all of their oxygen uptake or a good part of it. So that leaf litter can help keep the soil moist where the amphibians are. But if it does dry out, there are logs that are going to be there. And the big logs that are rotting and holding water for a long time are great amphibian habitat. But some mammals, small mammals, will dig burrows, so amphibians can use those burrows to keep moist. Then when we look at the low herbaceous plants, the shrubby plants, the juvenile trees, and the canopy trees, they're all transpiring water through their stomata. So the humidity in the forest is amazing. It can make us sweat a lot even though we're not in the sun, but that's great for keeping amphibian skin moist. Now, it can go 2 or 3 weeks without rain, and if the amphibians had moved to a lower lying area like this fern area, maybe that would be a great place to be if you were reincarnated as a frog. But at some point it's going to rain and get the woods wet, and that could make for a nasty day of us walking through Brown County with wet ankles and wet socks and sweaty face and everything. But just think how great it is for the amphibians that these misty, rainy days allow them to move and relocate in the woods. Does logging hurt amphibians? Well, it will. This yard where they pulled up the logs in Yellowwood State Forest, of course, is going to be a problem. And then the areas that they clear cut, now they do select or group cutting where they don't cut all the trees, but then in some areas they will do a clear cut. And in the 80s and 90s, most of them were really small like this, so the impact on amphibians was not great. But as we moved into the 2000s, we started getting bigger clearings. So here's one of them, a few years old at the time this picture was taken. So in the 80s and 90s, they'd only be about this big, but they made them much bigger. Here's another one There's another one on the other side of Crooked Creek Road. I think this is a huge one in there. Here's a triangular shaped one, but still there's a lot of woods in uh, in the area. So I think that the logging practices do not have a huge impact on amphibians. How about a prairie? One would think that a prairie, this one is Spin Prairie near, I think it's Reynolds, Indiana on Highway 421. You'd think that'd be hot and dry, but really look at the riot of plants. Down where the amphibians are, it's pretty humid. Where our head is, it might not be so humid, but where they are, it's very humid. Plus some prairie amphibians like tiger salamanders and leopard frogs can actually dig down into the soil to find moisture. So down in that prairie vegetation, it's going to be a lot of humidity, and there's going to be wet areas like this one and a pin oak swamp back there for them to breed and lay their eggs. So let's consider how much land they need. So amphibians might metamorphose from this low-lying area, and we look at this vegetation, we think that's a lot of humidity down in that vegetation. But as I mentioned before, amphibians tend to have a wanderlust. They get to a spot they like for moisture and food, but they are going to want to move on at some point and check out a new area. And here we have a mowed lawn here. I would see the leopard frogs jumping out into the lawn and jumping back, and at night probably trying the lawn out or going out into the boulevard. So you need to have a good amount of upland habitat for the amphibians to wander around. It looks great here, but not far to the left in this image. It's a parking lot. And here we can see again where they might breed down here, but they only have 50 to 75 yards before they're out of the safe zone. But how do amphibians survive in the winter time? Four basic strategies that I'm aware of. Some of them, as I mentioned before, during the rest of the year, use burrows. So the pond breeding salamanders in Brown County will use burrows a few centimeters below the surface of the soil, and that stays warm with the leaf litter and the soil. Or I'm sorry, that's tunnel use. Some can make their own burrows, as I mentioned before, the tiger salamander and the leopard frog, and then toads can dig their own burrows. So tunnel use is what I described first, got them flipped there, and burrow, they can dig their own burrows. Some, like bullfrogs and certain leopard frogs will use a lake sometimes to overwinter in where it doesn't go anoxic, and they'll just hang out on the bottom of a 8-foot section of the lake or whatever, and they'll wait till the spring comes and move to a marshy area to breed. But perhaps the most interesting and fascinating way of surviving the winter is done by the wood frog, the gray tree frog, the chorus frog, I think the spring peeper, and maybe some others, and that is they can tolerate being frozen. So they have this urine and sugar antifreeze that helps keep them alive. Now, it may only be a month or two in Indiana, and I've heard it's going to be an El Nino winter, which they may not need to freeze at all if that happens. But we have several frog species that can tolerate being frozen to survive the winter. So no matter how barren the landscape looks, there can be great amphibian life still down there, albeit a bit inanimate. The American toad, many people have probably seen. It melds in really well with the leaf litter, almost the same color. They have lots of poison glands over their skin. The parotid gland is a big one, but there's other poison glands there. They have fewer poison glands on the belly side, so occasionally in the woods you'll see one flipped over and its belly eaten out by some savvy predator. But all in all, the poison is a lot. So don't handle many amphibians very often, not only because of the toxins in their skin, but also if you handle them, they'll release their urine, basically, which is their water supply, and we get urine on our hands and get mad about that, but we make them vulnerable to dehydration. But if you know there's going to be a thunderstorm soon, then maybe you can handle them. So that's the American toad. The Fowler's toad, here's a burned prairie in northwest Indiana, and look at that camouflage of the Fowler's toad in the burned prairie. But if it gets into the grass, green grass, then you can see it a little better. The wood frog has great camouflage as well. It's not nearly as toxic, not that I've ever tasted, but not nearly as toxic as the toad. The bullfrog is the biggest frog. All these pictures taken with the slide film are taken from the same distance, same focal point. So this is a huge frog. And when I first saw these bullfrogs and other large frogs, and I thought they had a hunchback like this, and I thought of my Uncle Clarence, and I thought it must be painful to them. But then I learned a little anatomy, and the hips really go up halfway through. So these are the hip bones. There's only a few vertebrae here. So large hip bones to make a great launching pad where they can straighten up their vertebrae and make a great jump. Now, this is the western chorus frog, which likes grassy areas. And when I first came upon it, it was rotated 90 degrees to its right and facing you. And when I looked at it, I saw these stripes match the grass stripes, the dead grass stripes here perfectly. And I said, well, nobody's going to be able to see this frog. So I poked it and made it turn 90 degrees to the left, took the picture. And then I said, you idiot, you should have taken a before and after picture. So I tried to poke it back to go in the original position. And you can guess it finally got tired of me poking them. So you can do a little mental cut and paste and probably be convinced that the camouflage is extraordinary. The cricket frog is below Indianapolis, is still doing well. North of Indianapolis, not so well. Again, same focal distance, so it's a very small frog. And if you've ever seen it along the edge of a pond, it'll jump onto the water and, like Jesus, walk on the water or hop on the water and come back to land without sinking. So that was a cricket frog. The leopard frog, a little bit bigger here in a lawn, but oftentimes in a prairie. The gray tree frog is the Houdini of the amphibian world. If it's among green vegetation, it'll turn green. If it's on bark, it'll look like bark. If it's out in the sun, it'll kind of blanch itself almost and turn white. So it can change all those colors, but in none of those pictures did you see this yellow in the groin area, the inner thigh, and the inner calf. This we call it flash coloration, and we think it works like this. If you're a tree frog up in a tree and you're on the branch, maybe calling during the day to practice your vocalizations, and a crow lands near you, the crow might smell frog legs for lunch. And it gets closer to you and you start to panic, but you don't move, you stay still. And all of a sudden, when you think you're going to be eaten, you make a leap, and this yellow flash comes and startles the crow, we believe, to the point where it doesn't see where you landed on what branch. So we think that's a life-saving strategy. Now, here's a green frog in a pond defending a territory. So I came up to it. It was originally looking straight to the left, but when I came close to it, it turned and stared me down here. So why is this green frog doing this? It turns out they defend a territory. Why is it defending this territory? You guessed it, because it's sunny and warm. He's going to try to attract a female to breed there, so the eggs will develop fast and the initial development of the tadpoles will be fast. He's going to be a bigger male with a certain call characteristics we'll see in just a moment. And he'll defend this territory against me or an incoming frog. Now, the 2 times I saw a frog fight in Yellowwood State Forest, it was a day that was going to be rainy or something. I didn't have the camera, didn't have enough money for the film. So I don't have pictures of a frog fight, but thank heavens for YouTube.
When emergency strikes, first responders rely on the...
Look, there's a frog guarding its eggs. See that? Isn't that cool?
Defending it will let you come right up to it.
Ooh. Green frog.
And there's the intruder wanting to mess with him. He's already laid his eggs, but for some reason wants that spot.
Comes another one. Ooh, that one's fat.
And then they start to squabble a bit, but then the actual fight will start here. Or did I miss part of it? Oh, here they
back for more.
Coming back. I missed part of it, but you'll see it again. If you've ever seen Japanese sumo wrestling, that's exactly what they do.
There is a lot of life in this pond.
Come on. Okay, here we got it. Oh, let me go back and see the original sumo wrestling. Oh, here we go. And they'll do this just like the wrestlers do until one can be thrown out of the territory. You know, a lot of people will travel around the world to see cool stuff, but if we just look at our own feet sometimes, when we're out in nature, we'll find some really interesting experiences. Now let's check also a bullfrog territorial fight. Here's the stare down. Well, maybe he's thinking, doesn't want to fight. But here it is, the wrestling match. And that'll continue until one gets thrown out of the ring, so to speak. Now, while these male frogs are calling, they're advertising to females. So here's a female green frog in a muddy area about 50 meters away from a breeding pond, and it's listening to the males. She wants to know who's calling often. As we'll see in a moment, it takes a lot of energy to make these calls. And if a male can call a lot, he's in pretty good health. He's been eating well. He's not sick, so he has a good immune system. He's able to get away from predators because he's making a racket. So she believes he has a lot of good genes. So once it becomes nightfall, then usually at night, she'll go off to the pond and go toward the male she was calling. So here's a male in a shady, cool territory, and he looks kind of sad in this spot, but frogs have no facial expression. They always look the same. But he's not likely to get a mating, although sometimes these males are what we call sneaky males, and they will jump a female as she goes toward the preferred male. So the male in the lower quality territory did actually get the mating this time. Now here's a female American toad. She's much larger than the male. Now usually the male's on top, so this one is a newbie. He hasn't figured it out quite yet. The females are usually bigger because they make lots of eggs, so she has 3,000 large eggs. He's just making sperm, so he doesn't have to be nearly as big. But it looks like the wetland is to the right, and she's trying to go uphill and rub him off. But while she's doing that, another small male jumps on her back, and now she's in the steep part and trying to rub both of them off. Now, many of the toads and some of the frogs will breed over extended number of weeks, but some will breed in just 1 or 2 nights, like the wood frog. And the breeding can be so frenetic that sometimes males will try to mate with dead females. It's almost like it's necrophilia going on. But let's look at how it naturally goes. Gotta have a couple of.
A few days later.
Oh, I gotta listen to those again. Sorry.
It's easy to start selling on Depop. Just snap a few photos.
I should have gone to the 1 minute.
Finally, temperatures have moderated enough to melt away the ice. Now there are peculiar quacking sounds emanating from vernal pools. Spring must be here, because wood frogs have awakened from their winter sleep under the leaf litter and are congregating at vernal ponds to mate. In this annual spring kickoff ritual, males fervently seek out females and grasp them in a hold known as amplexus. Several males may compete for the opportunity to fertilize eggs as the female ejects them.
They might drown because of this.
Water from melting snow and
You might have noticed that the wood frog had paired pouches that it made its call. We're just going to look at one other kind of call. They have one pouch. So that's the gray tree frog, and you can see it takes a lot of energy to make those calls. Well, here's the normal position, though. If a larger female on the bottom, a spring peeper, and a smaller male on the top, she will extrude her eggs and he'll squirt his sperm out on them. These tend to be prolonged breeders, and this is kind of late in the breeding season. So they were so intent on mating that they didn't mind being on my finger to take that picture from the same focal distance. Let's look at some of the salamanders of Indiana. The spotted salamander, oftentimes with the orange spots on the head, about the size of a hot dog, and can live 10 or more years. The blue spotted salamander, which is found up north, is a little bit smaller, but also can live a long time. The Jefferson salamander, common in Brown County, and the marbled salamander, a little less common, but scattered around in various places. And here's the marbled salamanders breed around Labor Day, which is odd for amphibians. The pond might be dry at that time, so she lays her eggs, which are about the size of a dinner pea, a green pea, and they don't have shells on their eggs, so that evolved later in life for lizards and things like that. So she might go to whatever water she can find and pick it up in her cloaca, her hind end, and squirt it on the eggs. If a beetle comes by wanting eggs for breakfast, she'll eat the beetle or whatever. So she does a lot of parental care. Let's look at how their mating migrations
the
look
breeding
like.
pool after
Oh, come on. Not sorry.
Spotted, Jefferson, and blue-spotted mole salamanders breed in water in spring. There is a fourth New England mole salamander that breeds on land in autumn. They choose sites near dry pools that autumn rains will soon fill. From the surrounding uplands, the males come here to await females. A number of males will arrive a couple days or so ahead of females. They are boldly patterned, marbled salamanders. Their courtship involves nuzzling, bumping, and pushing each other with their snouts. And the males may carry on this behavior with each other before females arrive. Last night, a female made it as far as this piece of bark, a temporary shelter where she spent the daylight hours.
I saw that male nuzzling and pushing in the 1980s in Yellowwood State Forest, and it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. I just felt like it was a couple 100 million years ago, and I was just an inanimate object watching something that had been going on for forever. The Jeffersons and blue spotted form these all-female hybrids in certain parts of the state, and they're triploid, which means they have 3 sets of chromosomes. Now, we're diploid as humans. We get 1 set from our dad and 1 from our mom. But these triploids have 3 sets, and they give all of them to their offspring. The male sperm only makes the egg start to develop, but rarely gets incorporated into the actual zygote or fertilized egg. So we have these weird genetic lines, all female species or populations. The tiger salamander is the largest salamander to regularly go out on land. It's usually in prairies, but it can be in oak woodlands or oak savannas as well. The sirens, we don't know much about. They have only these two front limbs and no limbs back there. A big one can take two hands to hold like this. They're paedomorphic. They still retain the juvenile characteristics of the gills and a fin, but they're sexually mature. And we get these in a drainage ditch by Jasper Pulaski Fish and Wildlife Area, but we really don't know a lot about their distribution. The red-spotted newt has this aposematic coloration where they have a bright belly, advertising to enemies that they're highly toxic. The juvenile eft is oftentimes much brighter than this one, also advertising how toxic it is. One of the stream breeders is the long-tailed salamander, living up to its name with a really long tail. And the two-line salamander here has bred in underneath a rock. Rock is picked up to show the eggs. They hatch into the larval stage, which can be fairly long in duration, but they'll finally metamorphose into the adult. Then there's some salamander species that never go in water and are lungless, so all their respiration is through their skin. The slimy salamander is just that, very slimy. The redback salamander is the most common one.
Her light markings are more of a gray rather than the bright white of males.
Simparica trio protects against 3 categories of parasites.
Let's look at the optimal redback salamander habitat here once we get through the dog commercial. And the migraine.
A damp, rotting log. Burrowed into the soft, pulpy wood is our most common and plentiful salamander, the redback. There may be several inside the log.
So under the logs or in the logs or other damp spots is where you'll find the redback salamander. And sometimes there's no red stripe on there. Sometimes they're all red all over the body. So there's 3 different appearances of the redback salamander. Now, the pond breeding salamanders, though, have a lot of perils especially in an erratic environment like we have nowadays. So in this particular case, hundreds of Jefferson salamanders the size of a hot dog came to a breeding pond around February 1st, and then the pond froze over, which prevented the salamanders from gulping air, and we have about 100 dead salamanders once the pond thawed. But let's look at how the spotted salamanders choose their mates. Okay.
Her light markings are more of a gray rather than the bright white of males. There are obstacles to overcome. A stick. Her light markings are more of a gray rather than the bright white of males. There are obstacles. It may take a couple nights to complete the journey to the pool. He's reached the breeding pool after migrating possibly up to 1,000 feet or so.
It could be a mile even.
Many other males will likely be arriving too. A few days later, the females begin to arrive. They don't have swollen vents like males do. The mole salamanders are members of the family called Ambystomatidae.
And this happens at thousands of ponds out in the Brown County, Monroe County woods every year. So here's a spotted salamander after picking up sperm from the males and is laying her eggs, which is a gelatinous mass of material. Here's a case where Jefferson salamanders laid their eggs really early. So there are, as you can see, hundreds of eggs that all died. All these white eggs died under the ice when ice formed for an extended period. So again, these odd weather events can be traumatic for the amphibians. But many of the pond breeding amphibians lay these gelatinous egg masses. This is the wood frog egg mass. It starts out about the size of a ping pong ball and then swells up with water. And there'll be one egg mass usually per female, so you can count the egg masses to know how many females were there. They have an intermediate sort of rigidity to their egg mass, and this is meant to keep predators away and to help keep the eggs hydrated should the pond dry up some. The Jefferson salamander has a really loose gelatinous material, kind of like something that you might sneeze up in a bad winter cold, whereas the spotted salamanders have a very rigid egg mass. And here's a whole bunch of spotted salamander egg masses. Some are white, some are greenish, clearish green, but they all have this kind of algae growing in the membranes there. And you can see it up here as well. So the algae provide oxygen for the embryo. The egg masses are so thick it's hard for oxygen to diffuse in, so they help the embryo out. Meanwhile, the salamander also drinks some of the glucose that leaks out of the cells, so gains a second thing. But what do the algae gain? Well, they live in this egg mass for 2 months. The egg mass lasts way longer than the salamander does, so they get a free place to live for 2 months. If they're growing on the leaf litter of the pond, snails or caddisfly larvae are going to eat them within a day or two, so they get a free housing. Let's take a real quick look here at the development of the spotted salamander eggs over time. You can see the neural tube is forming there, I think. Starting to get a clear head and a tail. There's the yolk they eat off of. Well-developed eyes and gills, and the limbs are already formed in salamander larvae. Let's guess which one is going to hatch first. Oh, it was this one down here. I thought it was going to be that one. The summer frog breeders can't lay their egg masses down in the water because there isn't enough oxygen, so they lay them as a thin gelatinous film on the surface. Some other spring breeders, the chorus frog, jelly bean-sized egg masses with just a few eggs. The blue-spotted salamander, just a few embryos inside of a small egg mass. The Jeffersons are kind of like a marshmallow that you'd put on a Samora size with about 10 to 15 embryos in each, so there's a lot of them in there. Here, they like to attach them to sticks to get them off the bottom for better oxygen. Here's some wood frog eggs. Toads lay them in a string that they wind around through long distances, so I think by stretching out their eggs, that makes it hard for predators to find them. One of the great things about doing amphibian work is just getting to walk in the woods and see the flowers and the exercise. So pick your favorite one here. Came upon this blowdown and found there were 18 turkey eggs in that nest. I didn't know how many eggs were in a nest, but I walked through the blowdown and saw timber rattlesnakes. Sometimes they're right on the trail, so that can be a little bit troublesome. But what are some of the mortality events during the larval period? Drying up. Here's one of those rock pools on the island. It could dry up before they metamorphose. Here's a pond that dried up. Just 2 tadpoles died. That was it. But what happens when they hatch? So the wood frogs hatch and they kind of lay on the gelatinous egg mass for a while, and predators can have a field day on them. So in this 10 meters of pond or so, there's 250,000 tadpoles. A couple weeks later, a small fraction of that. A few weeks later, not that many, but they satiate their predators, and almost always some wood frogs will metamorphose. Here about the size of a dime or a nickel on the land. The salamander larvae are usually not nearly as numerous and they don't lay around. They usually go in hiding. This one didn't, but let's see how they feed. Oh, I forgot to the timing on that one. 20 minutes.
On the court, there's only one MVP. And in the showers, my MVP is Olay Intensely.
A few days later, the females begin to arrive. They don't have swollen. She'll guard the eggs until rains fill the pond and inundate the nest. When the eggs hatch in fall or hungry.
Didn't want to eat.
Sometimes it is. In this larval stage, it must use suction to ingest prey. Later, as an adult, it will be able to use its tongue to grab prey.
Well, the salamander larvae tend to be sit-and-wait predators, where they wait and then they'll just ambush the prey and suck them in. Now, who are some of the enemies of amphibians? Sometimes it's other amphibians. Here's a large Jefferson salamander larva, and it's probably eaten a wood frog tadpole, or it's cannibalized one of its own. So it can be a dog-eat-dog world. So this Jefferson salamander could eat that hatchling spotted salamander right there. It'd like be a nice kielbasa. And then here's a larger Jefferson. It could cannibalize a small Jefferson, or it could eat a wood frog tadpole. As long as the prey is narrower than the jaws, they can fit them in. So this adult newt spend a lot of time in the ponds. This is a Jefferson salamander. That's like a foot-long hot dog on that one if it turns around to eat it. So here's a Jefferson. There's the width of its jaws. It could cannibalize, or it could cannibalize its own here, or eat this wood frog tadpole. Now, prior to this day, I thought I knew so much about salamander larvae that I could be reincarnated as a salamander larva and know exactly what to do to survive to metamorphosis. But when I saw this fishing spider eating a salamander larva, it gone down the cage wall, pulled it up. It eaten the head, the arms, the shoulders, the thorax, the abdomen, had only the legs and the tail left to go. And it was like Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life. I said, Clarence, don't let me be reincarnated as a salamander larva. Let me be me. Let me be me. I was working in a pond one day, and this female dragonfly was hovering over the water about 10 or 15 centimeters. And if you've seen these kind of dragonflies, they'll dip down and drop their eggs into the water through their abdomen. They'll do this many times. And there was a sedge clump just to the left, and I saw out of the corner of my eyes this spider jump through the air, catch the dragonfly in the air, and the weight of the two of them came down and started eating it. Again, these aren't big, ferocious lions eating zebras or something that we might go on a vacation to Africa for, but in some ways it's just as cool. But now how about this? Here's a great tree frog tadpole. So there's the main body to it, which is kind of like a marble. There's the muscular tail and then the floppy fin. And in this case, it's blood red, but it doesn't optically show up through my skin. Here's a beetle larva that's going to metamorphose into a palm-sized aquatic beetle. And you look at the width of its jaws and you think this tadpole is safe from being eaten by that predator. But it turns out its lower jaw has these big C-shaped hooks that can splay out, and they can shish kebab that tadpole. So if they get it on the body, they got a dinner. If they get it on the muscular part of the fin, they got a dinner. But the colored fins tend to, in this case, attract the attack to the colored fin, and that can rip through. Those hooks can rip through. We'll see an example of that. But here's the beetle larva where it got the muscular part of the fin. But here's a case where a tree frog larva, the orange or red color of the fin, a directed attack, it ripped through. Here's another one, maybe a smaller one there. And if there's no predators present, they don't waste the enzymes and the energy to make the colored fins, so they have very little coloration. This is going to be a pond where there is the predator, that somehow the chemical cues from the predator trigger the coloration on there. So I tried putting them in the net, and they come as black-looking fins, but really they're blood red or orange. But here's a pond with no predators. They don't bother. The tree frogs don't put the coloration on. Dragonflies are also big predators. Here they are eating other dragonflies. Here's a dragonfly larva eating a tadpole, but here's how they do it. They have those big hooks too that expand out from their jaws, but they also have a hinge in their jaws. So unfold that hinge, they can actually probably got this salamander larva way out here. They can shoot its lower jaw out with those big hooks and skewer it. Again, I don't want to be reincarnated as a salamander larva. And here's those rock pools on Lake Superior, and there's a dragonfly larva. I don't see many tadpoles. Maybe it's eaten them all. This one will metamorphose and be the big dragonfly you see. What are some other dangers in the larval stage as we move on? There's a viral infection that hits in Indiana when the density of tadpoles is really high, and they'll oftentimes all die for 2 or 3 years. But when the population goes down because they haven't had metamorphosis, then the virus doesn't seem to transmit as much, so the population rebounds. The salamander larvae die at a lower percentage than say the wood frog tadpoles do. But some tadpoles do have skin toxins that allow them to live with fish. So these bullfrog tadpoles can live with fish. The green frog, not so much. Here's an odd one. At the time this pond at Kankakee Sands was almost dry, the tadpoles were beaching themselves. Some were in metamorphosis, some were not. They were beaching themselves. I think this is some kind of parasite, maybe that wants raccoon or mink to be their final host that caused them to change their behavior. I don't know on that one for sure. But is metamorphosis a walk in the park? So here's a green frog in metamorphosis, still has its tail, although it's shrinking, has its hind limbs and its front limbs. So it's not a good jumper because it still has a tail, but its tail is getting small, so it's not a good swimmer. So I think this green frog is doing a great thing. It's hiding in a camouflage situation in the sun, which will speed up its metamorphosis. There's going to be water snakes around, so don't move. Just stay in the sun, finish metamorphosis, and try to get by the snake. We can see that the hind legs develop steadily in tadpoles, starting as a little paddle and then getting much bigger. The front limbs develop inside the body and then ta-da, punch out as a full-fledged limb. So if you see one front limb and not the other, it's not a deformed frog. It just hasn't punched the other one out. But again, this leopard frog has good limbs, but it still has a long tail, so it's neither a good jumper nor a good swimmer hanging low. But once you do metamorphose, is it any easier? Here's a tree frog metamorph that's the size of a dime. So desiccation is a big danger. Plus, every animal on land is a mortal enemy. So life does not get easier. Here's a Jefferson salamander taking its first walk out of the pond. It's about the size of a cigarette butt. It can desiccate too. And then every shrew or beetle or bird that forages in the leaf litter is its enemy. But this spotted salamander has made it into October, starting to get its yellow spots, and one day its orange spots. So hurrah for this salamander. Well, let's conclude then. I think we're at the time we should be winding down with just a little bit on how did I learn a lot of these patterns in the animals' abundance and so on. And one of the key ways I did it was with this plywood box sampler. It's 1 meter internal length by 0.5 meter wide, and you can plunge it into the pond and then use a net that's the same shape as the box to get a sample, and do this many times around the pond, trying not to disturb too much. And you can get great information on the amphibians. So I have to carry this thing around, and so I get inside of it with the net on top, and sometimes I don't wear any pants. But I figured out one time while I was walking that I've carried this box maybe over 2,000 miles. So like from here to San Francisco. So kind of like Forrest Gump when he was in his running phase across the country, and then he just finally stopped. I decided when I turned 50, I'm just going to stop. I'm not going to carry the box anymore. You might find some people out in the woods when you're carrying that box sampler, and they'll have an impromptu party. You'll have a great time. Although I must admit to this day, this guy down in the corner still kind of creeps me out a bit. But there's what doing the box sampling looks like, and you get great information from it. Here's one up at the Indiana Dunes. You got to get it in the button bush. You got to sample everywhere you can. But here we have a sample with really healthy, fast-growing Jefferson salamander larvae. So it's probably a fairly sunny pond. There doesn't seem to be many enemies there. They don't have any tails bit off or anything like that. Here we have the beetle larvae with the blood red tails. These are all patterns we get in a pond without the beetle larvae or dragonfly larvae. They have a little bit of black pattern, but not the bright red or orange. We know that toad tadpoles are toxic to most predators, so you can bring forth a great multitude of toad tadpoles in certain wetland settings. We wanted to quantify a little bit more some of these predator prey and other interactions. So we would build these 3 meter long cages by 1 meter wide. And they had aluminum screening on the bottom, but you could push mud up through it and leaf litter into it. So you've got really a test tube, basically, of the pond. And you have them in a test tube rack or whatever apparatus. The sunlight changes over the period of the day. The morning it's here, the afternoon it's there. So every pen gets the same amount of sun, albeit at different times. But you can put in different combinations of beetle larvae, dragonfly larvae, newt predators, and so on, and quantify it. We did this at the Indiana Dunes. Some did it in southeast Michigan. And in this case, the pond started up here in the springtime. So that's the depth of the water. You just slide the pen down and you can see the stains here say where the high water mark is. So not only are you getting the predator-prey interactions, you're getting the crunch of the pond drying. So you can get really realistic results. But sometimes you don't want to either drop the box sampler into a pond or build cages in them. You just want the animals to do whatever they naturally would do in the pond, and you build these drift fences. So when they come to breed, you have coffee cans in the ground. They'll get caught in those. You can census them coming in. Sometimes they go over the fence because you have the flap on the inside, but you'll get them on the way out, and you can mark them and you know who you got and didn't get. And then you can estimate how many adults bred there and then how many metamorphosed from there. The metamorphs come out at night and they try to climb up the fence. They don't like to be upside down. If you catch a salamander, for example, try holding it upside down. It'll be really ticked off at you. And after they find out they can't get over the top, they just hang out underneath the boards like it's a log, and I can wake up at sunrise and go out and do the census without always having to be there at night. The bulldoze ponds were great to do this in. The dynamited cisterns were really good to do because it didn't take nearly as much fencing to build in them. This is back when I was in my 20s, quite svelte back then. But one of my favorite, that's where I saw the marbled salamander males nuzzling. I wish I'd have gone to see that more often, but I still have the memory blazoned. So the next time you're out walking in the woods and you come by a really smelly, sometimes rank looking wetland, it may not seem like all that great a place, but think about the amphibians that went there in the spring and mated, how they mated. We saw some of that. We didn't have time for all of it. What kind of dangers their larvae had during the larval period. This is getting to be about Labor Day now, so the metamorphosis is well along. It might smell of hydrogen sulfide, but it's a great story you can tell your friends. Or when you're walking through the woods, it could be so humid that your eyes are squinting with sweat and salt. But you can just think that the amphibians are doing better because of that humidity. So enjoy sharing these lives and times of Midwest amphibians. And I'm glad you all came along with me on the ride here. And if anybody has any questions or stories of their own to share with everybody of things they saw, we'd be glad to hear those.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cortwright. We're really grateful to have you in this presentation tonight. This has been awesome. To get our Q&A started, I wanted to start it with a question that I had. Based on all of your experiences in Indiana, where do you think is the #1 spot that we should go in spring migration to see a bountiful display?
I think a lot of the Brown County ponds are good. Now, when I turned 50, I stopped certain aspects of my studies. I kept going some parts for a little while. I mean, most of those ponds in Brown County on Crooked Creek Road were havens for amphibians. I hope they still are. I should be going to visit, but I just get so busy up here that I don't go there. But I mean, I'll never forget in the early 80s going on a day when there were still snow patches on the ground right off of Crooked Creek Road. and we saw Jefferson salamanders crawling over the snow going toward a pond. And then I saw the nuzzling of the marbled salamanders. I saw the German Liebespiel, a video I didn't show because I was running low on time. I saw that in those ponds that the spotted salamanders do. How that attracts a female, I don't know. But I think those areas in Brown County are the best because you can get right up to the edge of the pond. So often, like I know at Shirley Hines Meadowbrook, they have a nice amphibian pond, but it's hard to access it sometimes with all the vegetation around it.
Thank you. And then we had one question from a participant come in. Our friend Rebecca wants to know, how can they make their yard more frog friendly?
Well, if you live in an area like I do up in Porter County, you'll see toads going across your lawn. I'll see great tree frogs going across a lawn. And reducing the amount of lawn in the spirit of Doug Tallamy is a great way to do it, because then you won't mow them up so much. They'll be more likely in your native vegetation that you're mimicking for your area. And that one picture of the tree frog that was blanching itself, I showed two pictures. The first one, that's from a home planting where they were just hanging out on the plants there. The lawn is dangerous, but the natural vegetation is much safer. So I think that's the best way to do it, and try to get neighbors to help out with it. Make sure that if there's a pond in the neighborhood, if it gets too busy with traffic during the migration, you might go out there with a flashlight and help get the salamanders across the road if they need help. Some people have put in a tunnel under roads where heavy migration occurs, so the amphibians will go underneath. I'm not well versed on how well those work, but sometimes you can just help them out in that way. But those are some of the ways, I think.
Awesome. And then we have another question from our friend Cindy. Do amphibians secrete pheromones, and is that to attract the opposite sex?
Well, the ones that I know do, for example, newts. I think that might have been another video I might have skipped, but newts, well, I would say, first of all, watch that New England video. Go to YouTube the next rainy day when you can't go out to a nature preserve and do New England salamanders, and you'll find it. I believe that's the one where they'll show you how the male kind of strangles the female with his hind limbs, and his tail wafts chemical scents to make sure that she knows he's ready that he wants to mate. So there's pheromones there. The terrestrial salamanders have pheromones as well, but I don't know, maybe somebody else will have to chime in on whether frogs do. And I might add, I forgot to say it at one point, but I did not have any pictures of the crawfish frog, which is near and dear to the hearts of the Sycamore folks, because at the Shine Preserve and maybe others, the reintroduction of crawfish frogs is going. But Ben and Nate and Mike are the ones who could tell you how all that's going. I have nothing to add to that. So I'm sure you'll get updates from those folks on how the whole effort is going.
Yes, we look forward to hearing those results as well. And we did introduce them to a few locations across our Bean Blossom Creek Conservation Area. So we have years of monitoring ahead of us, and maybe we'll take some of the skills that you taught us tonight to do that monitoring. But the next question that we have coming in is from our friend Bill, and he wants to know, does a species' expected lifespan correlate to its adult size?
Not necessarily. Sometimes it does, but tiger salamanders are pretty big. But my recollection of the longevity data that I can remember seeing, they don't live as long as you would think they do. And then something like a newt is not as big as many of the mole salamanders, but I've heard they can live for well over a decade, maybe even 15 to plus years. So they're smaller than, say, Jefferson salamanders, but they can probably live longer than them. So there's some correlation with longevity, but not real tight correlation.
Amazing. Does anybody else out there in the chat have a question for Dr. Cortwright?
Or if somebody wants to unmute and tell us all about some cool thing you've seen in the amphibian world that we haven't seen. Chime in.
I think one thing to say on behalf of Sycamore, right now the frogs are alive and well at Bean Blossom, so definitely come see them there. And we have Cindy coming in who has a question. Cindy, if you want to unmute, we should be able to hear you.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, are glowworms considered an amphibian or something? Because I had never seen, I'm 70 years old. I saw glowworms for the first time in my life like a year ago. And I just thought that was a joke, but they actually really exist. But I'm wondering what species of critter does a glowworm fall under?
I've heard that word before, but I'm drawing a blank. It looks like it's an insect of some kind. They're bioluminescent insects, often beetles that use light to attract mates, assuming the AI is right. So it's some kind of insect there, but my aging memory kind of made me forget what a glowworm was. Thank heavens the phone saved my life.
Okay, thank you.
Molly, you're up next.
Well, I just wanted to say that glowworms are related to fireflies. They're
Okay.
the same family. And can frogs really smell fish, or were you just kind of using that as a metaphor?
Well, I seem to remember reading a paper a long time ago that reported that they could detect whether fish were present in a pond one year to another. I could never find that paper again because I don't remember it, but I seem to recall reading it that some of them can detect the fish odor, and that can signal to them not to breed and maybe choose another pond around there. We do know that like the tadpoles that turn red on their tail and blood red and orange on their tail, all you have to do is put water from a tank with a predator in with the tadpole. They don't have to even see the predator. Just the water from the predator can make them put the coloration on. So there are some intricate chemical cues going on, olfactory or other senses in amphibians. I'm not super well versed in them, but I know a few of them.
I also have a question. I think that we have American bullfrog living in our neighborhood based off the calls that I'm hearing. Is there anything that is American bullfrog specific that you might know that I can do to help them out?
Well, they have one of the long, protracted breeding seasons, so the males will be there for a good length of time, maybe 6 weeks or so, and they run the danger of raccoons and mink marauding the shoreline forms. But just natural vegetation around the pond. They usually need a permanent pond that doesn't dry up because the tadpole stage can last over a year.
Okay, we have kind of a dry creek. That kind of.
What's that?
We have a dry creek.
Yeah, when the juveniles metamorphose, if they can get past the water snakes, they'll look for temporary water to hang out on while they're growing. So that could be in the creeks.
Okay.
So that the juveniles will use the creek to have a moist spot and a place to start growing, but ultimately they need a permanent body of water to breed in. Okay. And they can tolerate fish being present.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
That was a good question. Carolyn, you're up next.
Hey, this was a great talk. I am a huge frog lover. I'm a biologist and I grew up in California. And I had two things that I would love to add to the discussion. One of my favorite memories of me and my children is being in the Bay Area. And we used to have redwoods in our backyard. And when it would rain really hard, the arboreal salamanders would come out and they would be in this puddle in my yard. And so the kids and I would go out with the umbrellas and, you'd walk into the yard and you'd see, you don't normally see them, but then we'd see these huge salamanders. And anyway, they were just kind of enchanting, although they kind of have big teeth for salamanders, but very cool and dynamic. The other thing I was going to say is that when I moved to Indiana, my yard had literally nothing in it. And so I started planting a whole bunch of native plants in my backyard. And one of my greatest wins is seeing a leopard frog that showed up at some point. And so it was in July or whatever, the sprinkler was on, and I just was so excited to see him. I mean, because everywhere the grass is clipped, with an inch of its life, but I have a ton of natives and I kept planting stuff in the beds and taking out as much lawn as possible. And it's so nice. I love to hear them calling and just like to discover new things in my yard. And I love what you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing what you know.
Great. My brother lives in the San Francisco area, so I've been out to some of those redwoods and seen some of their salamanders. It is amazing. And one of the first salamander publications I ever read was by a researcher named Twitty, and it's called Of Scientists and Salamanders. And he did some kind of like physiology medical school research for a long time, but late in his career, he did newt studies out in California, and he would catch the newts in a stream and drive them around miles all over the place and then release them, and then he'd find them back at the stream,
Wow.
like 5 miles away. It was a fascinating read.
That is awesome. That I'll have to look for that. Very cool. Yeah, thank you.
And I think one more question to round us out for the evening, another one from Cindy, and is that are any of the species that we talked about tonight in jeopardy or are threatened? And what can we do to help?
I focus mainly on ones that are not threatened because I can run into them a lot and do studies on them. But the crawfish frog, of course, we have great people working on those. So those are ones that need help. The sirens may be common because we get them in a drainage ditch, and they may be common in ditches, but nobody's been looking at them. But otherwise, we think the siren's kind of low abundant. Same with mud puppies. We don't know where they are, but there are certain other amphibians that are highly endangered. Some are native to southern Indiana, and like the green salamander, and they only have a limited amount of habitat down there. So they're endangered both because of human pressures, but also because they never were very common in Indiana. But then some like spadefoot toads, we got reports from Nate quite a bit about how much they were expanding. They were very rare, I don't know, 20 years ago or so in Indiana, but now very common. So they're going all different directions in Indiana. Some are threatened, others are doing well, but nothing is a guarantee in today's world.
I think that's a good way to put it. Well, thank you to everyone, and especially thank you to Dr. Cortwright for being here tonight and presenting on behalf of Sycamore and the Lives and Times of Midwest Amphibians. For folks still left on the chat, I just want to say a few places that you can go right now to check out amphibians. And first of all, Bean Blossom Bottoms, Touch the Earth Natural Area in Bartholomew County. We have Frog Pond there that is alive and well and screaming, if you will. Tons of wood frogs at Canyon Forest and so many more. So hope to see you out on the trails. Maybe we can convince Dr. Cortwright to come down and do a walk in the woods with us. But until next time, we'll see you at another Sycamore event and at our next conservation conversation. So thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Yeah, I'm doing one with Shirley Hines next week on June 6th. So I got to go this weekend to plot it out. That's that pond that's hard to access, I mentioned. I got to find the one spot where you can get at it and see what's there.
Maybe you should go up to their Ambler Flatwoods.
And then Ambler, yeah, I've done a little bit of looking around there, but not a lot. Ambler can get really mosquito-y sometimes. Was it bad when you were there?
I think just because of the wind, no, but
Oh, but sometimes it is in there. But I got to get back. I keep thinking I got to go back and check out a lot of these ponds to make sure the amphibians are as abundant as they were, like I said, years ago, and then get to know them better, and especially Bean Blossom Bottoms to learn more about it. I mean, I was speculating based on what you've said a lot on what I thought was going on there, but it'd be great to go check out the various areas.
probably saw a good 100 frogs today there. So it is alive and well. And I came across for the first time, and it was awesome to have a participant tell me this, but at our Cedar Crest office, our main office, there were strings of what I now know to be toad eggs all over the place. So that was really awesome. And the same at our Powell Preserve. We just constructed or reconstructed the stream bed, which was eroded quite deeply and now is quite flat and has more areas to flood, but found a lot of toad eggs there as well.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's great getting.
We are lucky. Okay, well, I'm gonna sign out. Kate, thanks for all
Okay.
your technical help. Dr. Courtwright, I'll follow up with you via email, and I'll be sending a follow-up email to all participants as well that has the link to this. So thank
All right.
you.
And yeah, especially the recording, because my class this summer, they normally do an extra credit thing where they help plant at a restoration, but it turns out that there's 3 days that the group is planting this spring. 2 are on class days at the same time, and the third is on a Saturday. Do you think I'm really going to get the students to come on a Saturday? Not likely. So I have to substitute in watching a video. It might be the amphibian one because we do diversity of life. So it might be the amphibian one that they'll have to look at. So but if I don't know how long it'll be before you have the recording link up. I'll probably put the extra credit up not next week, but the week after.
Awesome. Maybe I'll, if I watch again, do I get credit?
A pay bonus.
Yeah, that's what I like to hear.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'll reach out soon. I'll see you all.
All righty. Thanks very much.
All
Great to
right.
meet you, and enjoy the rest of your summer.
Yes, see you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.